Yo, so today we're going to be breaking down a simple bouncy melody for someone like Gunna and then throwing some drums on it at the end. Alright, so for the first sound in the melody, it's my go-to pluck. It's the rewind pluck from the Adapt Serum Bank. Overall, this has just been my favorite pluck for probably about a year now, and it's just a really solid sound. Alright, and then here's the main MIDI for the rewind pluck, and overall it's a really simple melody that just has a bunch of descending triplets. And like a lot of my recent melodies, there isn't a lot of variation in it, so as you can see, it's just a 4-bar loop that repeats for 8 bars, just to give it a little bit of length so I can have some variation in other patterns. And then if I were to go ahead and make something similar, we're going to be working in D sharp minor, so I'm going to put that down, and then I'm also going to put in a G sharp. So for that second chord, I chose G sharp because when you transpose the root note up 5 or down 5, it kind of keeps the same feeling, but also makes it seem a little bit more dark and simple. So after we have that, we can go ahead and build up a simple triad. And then we can just go ahead and transpose the middle note down 1, and then offset all these. And that's pretty much the whole melody. So then we can go ahead and duplicate that over, and then just kind of change around the notes a bit. And then we can go ahead and duplicate that over again. And then finally, for this last little section, we're just going to want to spice it up a bit, so we can go ahead and move these notes around. So we can go up there. And then after we have that variation in there at the end, we're going to want to go ahead and make this seem a little bit more full. So we're just going to add in the middle notes back into the chord, and then we're going to go down 1. And that's how I come up with these kind of melodies. It's pretty much just that pattern copied over 3 more times with very slight variations just to make it a little bit more interesting. And then in the final melody, you can see what I'm talking about with these slight variations. So basically the only other thing is I have a little bit of a crazier roll here at the end just to spice it up a little. And then I went ahead and rendered that out, but before I did, I added some effects. So I have a portal preset called Trembling Time with the mix turned down, halftime on the 1/8 triplet preset, again with the mix turned down, a shaper box that just had a volume and filter automation, a EQ just to cut the lows, and then finally an imager just to make it a bit more wide. And then I actually have 2 versions of that. One of the versions is just normal with the normal pitch, and then one is reversed and put up an octave. And on the one that's reversed and up an octave, I have more additional presets. So I have Portal on the jittery tape preset, which is automated, Valhalla Supermassive on the default preset, which is also automated, a gross beat on the 1/3 beat gate that is automated, an EQ to just kind of dip out of the highs and boost the mids, an EQ to cut the lows, and then finally an imager to make it more mono. And then like I mentioned, here's the 2 versions. So this is the one that's reversed and up an octave, and this is the one that's normal. So I have all of these automation clips, but the main thing I wanted to focus on is the supermassive. So you can see that I only used a bit of a chop, and I have the blend mode on crossfade. So that kind of helps a little bit with it not cutting off randomly. But then I also automated the supermassive, so there's a little bit of a delay fade out, so it doesn't feel really weird if that melody just kind of stops. But overall, those 2 patterns combine really well together, and here's what they sound like. Alright, and then for the next sound, I have a Mallet one-shot called Cute, and I believe this is from the Flowers Volume 1 kit, but overall it's just a really nice dry mallet that you can put a lot of effects on to make it sound super unique. And then here's the MIDI for that mallet, and overall it's pretty much the same as the other MIDI, but I went ahead and kind of compressed it. So if you remember, this A sharp was up an octave, so basically what I did is kind of transpose all the notes closer to each other by octaves, not really changing like the F sharp to an F or anything, but just pushing them closer together. And then I went ahead and rendered that out through the same effect chain that I just showed, but I went ahead and turned off the halftime, but everything else is still the same. So here's what it sounds like all rendered out and with effects. So overall, it's a really cool kind of rhythmic pattern, and I also should mention that I did pitch it down an octave. For the next sound in the melody, I grabbed another one-shot, and this one is the Tino Bell from one of the exotic one-shot kits. Overall, all the volumes of those one-shot kits are super solid, and you should definitely go check them out. And then here's the MIDI for this, and the main part of it is just copying that same descending triplet pattern from the first MIDI, but then I went ahead and also added a faster variant with the velocities going a bit crazy. So I have them going upwards, and they're very even. So how you get that, if I was to normalize this, you just hold right click on the one you want to be highest, and then you can drag down. And as you can see there, we got a nice even spread. Then we can hold Alt and scroll down to lower it to where we want it. So after that, I just went ahead and paste that over a bunch of times. And then the second half doesn't have the super fast repeating, but it is up an octave. And then I went ahead and rendered that out, but I did add some effects before I did. So I have halftime on the 1 bar preset with the mix turned down to 80%, an EQ to cut out the majority of the lows and the mids, and then finally an imager just to make it a little bit more wide. And then like I've done in a couple of my previous videos, I went ahead and double timed that. So you're basically taking the rendered melody and shrinking it to half the length. So it's double the speed, but it also goes up a couple octaves, I'm pretty sure. But how you do that is by adjusting the time knob in the sampler. So you just want to go till it's half the length and it'll kind of snap into the right place. So you don't have to worry about it being unquantized. So after I had it double timed, I went ahead and added halftime on the 1 bar preset, and this is automated, and EQ again to cut out the lows and the mids, and then finally just the normal pancake preset. And then the only other noteworthy thing I did with this is turned the blend mode to smooth, and then I went ahead and dragged all of these back about half a cell. So this kind of gives it a nice pulsing feeling and almost makes it feel a bit more sample. So after all those effects and speeding it up, here's what it sounds like. So overall, it's just a nice little high-end accent melody. All right, so for the next sounds in the melody, it's 2 sounds that kind of get combined together. So the first one is a pad from Flowers Volume 1 called Makeup, and I have the start offset pushed up a little bit so there isn't as much attack. And then the second one is a pluck called Delay from the Money XO Serum Bank. This has been one of my favorite plucks recently, and I actually used it in my last video as well. So for the pad, it's a super simple pattern and just copies the root note of the melody being D sharp, and then I have a little hit here again at D sharp, but it's at up an octave. This kind of gives the effect that Nick Mira talked about when he was breaking down Bandit, where if you have a hit right before it starts again, it just kind of adds a bunch of energy. So that's kind of what I was going for this. And then for the delay pluck, the MIDI just copies the last little bit of the first MIDI that I showed, but I went ahead and took out some notes so it just isn't as busy. And then for the effects on the pad, I have Valhalla Supermassive on the default preset with the warp turned up 10%, a little bit of distortion with the mix turned way down, an EQ to just kind of cut out all the frequencies that I didn't want, and then finally a pancake just on the default preset with the mix turned down to 80%. And then for the effects on the delay pluck, I have Lo-Fi Space Stereo. I went ahead and picked this up when it was free a couple months ago. I'm not sure if it still is, but if it is, you should definitely go pick it up. Then I have an EQ, again, just cutting out all the frequencies I didn't want and making it feel a bit more old. And then finally a pancake on the default preset, but I have it flipped the opposite way, so the 2 melodies kind of bounce ear to ear with each other. So if we go ahead and play those 2 melodies together after all the effects, here's what it sounds like. And then for the final sound in the melody, it's a bass called Jazz Bass 5. This has become one of my favorite basses recently, and overall it's kind of a blend between a synth sub bass and like an acoustic bass. And then here's the MIDI for it. So it's a bass, it copies the root notes, but then the only variation I have is a little chop where the G part of the melody is up an octave, just to give it a little bit more bounce and overall just make it sound a little bit more interesting. But I also don't have that happening all the time, so that does also add a bit of variation. Then I did have to render that out because I only have the demo version of Analog Lab, so I went ahead and threw Portal on the Morph Driver preset, and then a little bit of distortion to make it feel a little bit more aggressive. So then after those effects, here's what it ends up sounding like. So it's overall just a super low and gritty bass. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the main sounds and the melodies, but I did add 2 texture loops. So I have a vinyl crackle from a lo-fi drum kit, and then a drum and texture loop that I made. And like I mentioned in my last video, I really like using textures. They just kind of make the melody feel a little bit more alive and give it a bit more character. So here's what those 2 textures sound like. So yeah, those are all the sounds that went into making the melody, and I went ahead and pitched it up 3 after I rendered it all together. So here's what it sounds like all combined and pitched up. Overall, I think it's just a really nice, simple, dark melody that'll sound really good with some drums. So now we can go ahead and get started on the drums. Alright, yeah, so that's going to be pretty much it for the video. I might end up changing the 808 later, but I'm pretty happy with how the drums are now. But yeah, that's it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.